And it's recording.
Okay, good.
So how are you today?
Oh, I'm good.
That is good to hear.
Yeah, I had a class this morning on the Pilgrims, so that was interesting.
The Pilgrims.
Well, there's pepper in there, but you
Yeah.
might need salt.
Oh, there's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And like, was it talking about like how they like enslaved Indians and stuff like that, or was it kind of a more positive class?
Yeah, no, it was, what they were, in England. They were, basically they were a cult,
Really?
and the English weren't too unhappy when they left. They went to Holland first for 10 years, and then they went and even Holland was too progressive for them. They wanted to go way back in the Bible, live according to the Bible. So it was interesting. Depressing, because, because they had a rough time the first year.
In America?
But then you didn't. Well, Jamestown, they kept putting people in Jamestown. They sent about 8,000 people there, and they couldn't get them to stay alive. They wanted to have at least 1,000 people in Jamestown, and they just didn't succeed. They kept dying off.
Yikes. So you want to jump into it?
Yes.
Okay. When were you born?
I was born June 6, 1942.
What was happening at the time, historically or personally?
Well, it was during World War II, which I didn't realize and didn't care about. Yeah, but it was right in the middle of the war.
1942. America hadn't intervened yet.
No, they didn't come in until 43 or 44. I'm not sure.
What was going on with your family?
Well, my father was away during the war. Well, actually, when I was born, he was still in the reserves and he was close by, so he was able to visit. Because I have pictures of him holding me, and he's in civilian clothes, but I know he was in the army, training. So, but I have no memory of him as I got older, because he didn't, the war was over in 45, but he wasn't released. He became a prisoner of war, and he wasn't released until 1946, when I was 4. And my mother had told me about him, and showed me pictures, and when there was a letter from him, she'd read me parts of it, but I didn't know him. So when he finally came to the door, I didn't know who he was, and I was afraid of him.
Afraid of him?
Yeah, because he was a stranger, and everybody was, excited to see him, because by that time we were living with my grandparents, and my mother, and they were all excited to see him, and I didn't know who he was, and it just scared me, all that commotion all of a sudden. Yeah.
Was it about him personally, like him being from the war, kind of this war-torn person, or was it just
No, it was
a
just
stranger?
that I didn't know him. He was a stranger.
Okay.
I knew all the people in the building, and but he was a stranger to me.
Was this in Radebeul?
No, that was in Wurtzen. That was after Dresden was bombed. My mother and I moved in with my grandparents in Wurtzen, which is a small town near Leipzig.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, my mother, naturally, she knew, that he was being released finally. The reason they kept him was because he spoke languages. You know, he spoke German, French, and English. So they kept him to, help release all the other prisoners. So he was one of the last ones to be released. And then my mother knew that he was going to be released, and I think she should have warned me. Yeah. So she had gotten him a job as a school teacher. And by that time, you know, Germany was divided into 4 sections. There was the American section in the south, the French section in the middle, and the British section in the north, and the Russian section in the east. So by the time he was released a year after the war, the Russian section was completely closed off. There was no more travel. I mean, you could travel between the American and the French and the English. There was, you know, there was no noticeable change, but the Russian section was completely closed off. So she got him, the only jobs he could have had was in a factory and as a teacher. And he said, I can't be a teacher. And she said, you know, in the factory, you're so clumsy, you'd kill yourself. So he said, but, you know, every teacher in the Russian section had to teach Russian. He said, I don't speak Russian. And she said, it doesn't matter. You'll be teaching children. Just keep 1 chapter ahead of them. You'll be fine. And he was. I mean, he was so good. They sent him to other schools in the district to teach Russian there because he was such a good Russian teacher. And I remember standing outside our house. Well, we lived upstairs of the schoolhouse. There was no running water. The toilet was it had a cistern underneath it. I was never allowed to use it. My mother was afraid I'd fall down the hole, you know. And, you know, I don't remember if we had electricity. I don't think there was any electricity yet in the whole village. Because I remember eating by candlelight at night. So I don't think we had electricity. But anyway, we'd be standing outside, and my mother would have his lunch in a bag, and he would come bicycling by from one school going to another, and they'd kiss real quick, and she'd give him the bag, and he'd bicycle off. Yeah. So he was really busy. But they always planned to escape to the west. So ever so often, on a weekend, he would take a bundle of our possessions like clothes and special mementos, photo albums, and he would send them. He would go to East Germany, and you could still get from East Germany to West Germany, and then he would, you know, sneak into West Germany and mail the package to a post office box in the West. So he would keep doing that, and plus my mother got pregnant as soon as he got home, so we couldn't escape with her pregnant, and we couldn't escape with a newborn baby. We had to wait till Peter, my brother, was old enough so we could keep him quiet. And then, and so we, you know, all this time, you know, he was sending packages to this post office box in West Germany. And then the Communist Party was after him to join them. Because you join the, you know, not everybody can join the Communist Party. It's by invitation. or at least it was back then, and they were strenuously inviting him to join. So he finally said, he said, okay, I'll join. And so he got scared, and my mother got scared. So the next day we had to leave. So we put Peter in the stroller and packed one suitcase of everything that we needed right then. And we escaped across the border. It took quite a while. It took 3 days, I think. But we made it, and we crossed near Hamburg. And then when we crossed the border, we turned ourselves into the local police department, and they put us in a refugee camp until my father had a job, or we could find relatives or friends who could take us in. So my father found a job with the British Travel Bureau, and he called a school friend of his and said, guess what? I'm in West Germany. And this friend, he was so happy, he sent him a check for us to buy ourselves a house. That's a good friend. And it was, my father paid him back, even though he didn't want the money back. He meant this as a present.
Mm-hmm.
So my father found a house, a job first, and then a friend of his that he was in the prisoner of war camp, they took us in until we found a house. It was a teeny little house, but it had a lot of land with it. It had 1 or 2 acres, and it had fruit trees, and it had strawberries, a lot of strawberries that we sold to a local grocery store.
Wow.
And we planted potatoes. Well, not we, I didn't do anything. So, yeah.
I missed.
And then what else?
That was
Yeah. And that house too, it had no running water. And there might have been electricity by that time. Yeah, in fact, the radio worked. Yeah, that's right. There was electricity by that time. Yeah. So, and then the job with the English Travel Bureau sort of petered out because the English didn't really, they were close enough. They didn't have to keep troops in northern Germany, so they just moved out. So that ended that job, and then this friend who had given us the money, he hired my father to work for him in one of his branches in Bremen. So we kept our house in near Hamburg, and we went there on weekends only, but we went to live in Bremen, and that's where Opa lived. That's where my father had his job, and that's where we lived until we came here.
in Bremen?
In Bremen, yeah, because we applied for a visa because we were displaced persons, so we were able to apply for a visa to come to the United States, because it's one place my father had never been to, so he wanted to try what it was like in the United States. So we got the visa, and we had 1 year to use it. So we used to go on vacation once a year to Bavaria, so we took a long vacation, go to Bavaria, and then we sold all of our furniture and packed up our stuff and came here. That was in on August 16th, 1956. That's Katie's birthday. And then we went to California first, to Los Angeles, and we stayed with a friend that my father had made in the prisoner of war camp. He was a tool and die maker, and he had come 2 or 3 years earlier. So we stayed with them until we could find an apartment, and my parents found jobs. So the only job they could really find was cleaning offices at night, which neither one of them really liked. So, and plus the climate was so, it was, with the smog and that, there were days where I couldn't take a deep breath. It was so bad. So we decided to we were our own sponsors. We didn't have a sponsor, so we could move around wherever we wanted to. So we decided to go to Milwaukee, because there were a lot of Germans there. And we just packed up and went to Milwaukee, and my father found a job at the Lakeside Laboratories and as an import-export clerk, and that's where and then we bought a house there, and for the first half year while we were looking for a house, we lived in the furnished apartment, which was pretty sad. But then we bought the house, and that's where they all lived until first I married, and then Peter married, and then they sold the house and moved to Mexico for about 6 years, because there's Guadalajara, because there's a huge German community there. And then they decided to move back to Germany.
Am I totally making it up that Guadalajara was where all the Nazis went to seek refuge?
No, that's more like Argentina. Argentina
okay.
And Brazil.
Somewhere in South America.
Yeah.
Brazil, right.
Oh yeah,
Brazil.
Argentina and Brazil, because there are a lot of German names. Well, look at that model, Gisela Bündchen. I mean, that's about as German a name as you can get.
Yeah. I don't know who that is.
She's married, she's a famous model. She's married to some quarterback. Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, she's world famous. Anyway, I mean, there are a lot of Germans living in South America. Not just the Nazis, but I mean, even before the war, where, people from America used to go to Europe to do I forgot what they called it, there was a name for that, visiting all the, I'll think of it, visiting all the countries. Germans would go to South America and visit there. Yeah. I mean, that was everybody's dream vacation, going to South America. So what else do you want to know? What is this for, anyway?
I don't know. I just, I came up with kind of the broad overview of your story, and then my journalism teacher told me to ask you, how it affected the family dynamic, and, did your father seem changed, or your mother seem changed?
Well, for one thing, they didn't, my mother felt at home in the United States. She liked it here. She made friends. My father never liked it. I mean, he was used to traveling. He traveled, he lived in China. He worked for an English company in China. He you know,
Was this before or after the war?
that was way before the war. In fact, he took the train to China. He took the Siberian Express to China.
Wow.
I know, that must have, you know, and I never really asked him about that. He told us, you know, every train car had a pot-bellied stove on it that burned coal. I mean, if that isn't dangerous. And at night the train would stop and everybody would get off and they would sleep at a hotel and eat at the hotel, and then in the morning they'd board the train again and go on for another day. But I mean, he took the train to China. But anyway, that's going on a tangent. He never liked it here. I mean, he hated what was going on politically. I would get letters from him, 2 and 3 page typed letters, just complaining about things. And he, you know, he lived in Wisconsin, a state that works.
Yeah.
I mean, if he had lived in Illinois, I don't know what he would have done. But, you know, these letters, I couldn't even sit down and read them all at once. I would have to read a little at a time. You know, it was just too much. But he just hated it here.
Wow.
And when they did go back to Germany, it wasn't the same old Germany anymore. It had changed so much, it was a foreign country to them again. You know, so he didn't really feel at home.
Huh.
So, you know, it was sad because he was, you know, he was a misplaced person to the truest sense of the world. He was misplaced here, and going back to Germany, he was misplaced. You know, that 6-year interlude in Mexico, that was just an interlude. You know, he was waiting for something else. You know, he always planned to go back to Germany, you know, his home. But it wasn't a home anymore, so, you know, that was sad.
Do you think that was due to the war?
He never talked about the war.
He didn't talk about the war?
He never ever talked about the war. The only thing that I know about his war years is from Mike. When Mike was in high school, he was interested. You know, Mike had studied World War II, and he was interested, and he'd read books, and he asked my father specific questions. And that's how that's where Mike found out that his grandpa was on Sword Beach in Normandy during the invasion on June 6th.
I thought it was before.
No, you're thinking of
Dunkirk?
Dunkirk, yeah. Yeah, he was fighting with Rommel, and the reason they were at Dunkirk was they were moving west, and there were 3 arms of the army, and the one that my father was in was the middle one, and they had progressed too far. The side pincers, or whatever you call them, they hadn't reached them yet, so they had to wait until the rest of the army caught up, because if there weren't enough of them to attack. So my father said they were close enough to Dunkirk they could actually hear the guys speaking, but they weren't allowed to attack. You know, which was lucky for the guys in Dunkirk. But I mean, he was on Sword Beach.
There'd be no movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would have been a massacre, yeah. But, I mean, obviously the Germans didn't have the same designations the Allies had, so my father didn't know he was at Sword Beach. You know, because Mike asked him, you know, what did you see? And my father mentioned there were sailplanes flying overhead. And by that, Mike knew that the only place that there were sailplanes was at Sword Beach, so he knew that he was at Sword Beach.
Sword Beach,
That was
Normandy?
in Normandy, yeah. And that was attacked by the English. That's where he became a prisoner of war for the, he was in France, but he was a prisoner of war with the English in Cayenne. And at that same time, the French were still fighting in Indochina, in Vietnam. So ever so often they would come into the German prisoner of war camp, and they would line up the prisoners, and then they'd take every second or every third prisoner. They'd count them off. Every second prisoner would have to step forward, and they would take those prisoners and send them to Vietnam.
To fight for them?
To fight for them, which is against the Geneva Convention. And every time the commander of the prison camp was a close friend of, he was English, but he was a friend of my father's from way before the war. So he would call him in and say, tomorrow morning, be at my office at 6 o'clock in the morning. No questions asked, be there. And that's why he was never signaled out to go to Vietnam.
Wow.
A lot of Germans, the ones that survived Vietnam, they actually walked home from there. I mean, look at a map. They walked home from Vietnam. Yeah. What else?
I'm
getting hoarse. I need a drink.
When were you first aware of the war?
I wasn't. I was too little.
You were too little?
I mean, yeah.
Even with
when
the
it was
bombings?
over, when it was over, it was. I was 3 years old. I mean, Oma must have been. My mother must have been scared to death, but she made a game out of it for me. The sirens would go off, and she'd say, "We're going in the basement now," and she'd be upbeat about it. She'd bundle me up and take me in the basement, and in the morning I'd fall asleep there. In the morning I'd be in my bed, and I always felt safe because she was around. She always took care of me, so I wasn't really scared. I mean, afterwards, after the war, I was already married, and some planes flew over Troxel, and it sounded just like the, it must have been some warbirds.
Mm-hmm.
I got really scared. So, it must have been in the back of my mind, but I got really, really scared. Which is odd.
It's just this deep
Yeah.
subconscious. It has to be subconscious.
Yeah, even though she made me feel good all the time, I must have caught some of her fear. Why am I crying?
It's okay. I understand. I can't even imagine. So you never noticed, consciously you never noticed?
No, I was never afraid. I don't remember ever being afraid.
And the first time you were, was this time that the planes flew
Yeah,
over?
that was in Droxel. I was married. I had children.
It's interesting. I'm in psychology right now. So.
Yeah, memory is a funny thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make light of your
Yeah. Yeah,
trauma,
it's
but-
weird, yeah. Well, even, the first time I went back to Germany, when Mike was in service there and we went to visit him, and I was forced to speak German. Because, I would talk German to my mother, and to Peter we would talk German, and then it would get difficult and we'd switch to English. But I tried to keep up my German. But when we went to Germany, I was forced to talk German. And I talked more German than at any other time. And memories kept coming back. I would have dreams about things that I had long forgotten or that I had, tried to forget.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Were they like positive?
Just little incidences that I had forgotten, that came back. Nothing necessarily bad, but, things that happened during the war. And I can't think of any examples now, but it was just weird that I would remember all these things, from being back in Germany. And the funny thing too, I was always homesick for Germany until we finally went back and visited, and I wasn't homesick anymore.
America was your new home?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I mean, it was my home long before that, but there was still, in the back of my mind, there was this homesickness for something. And then, when we went back, I realized I can go back anytime I want to. I don't want to, except maybe once a year. Yeah. So I wasn't homesick anymore.
That's nice, like closure.
Yeah. And now I don't even want to go back once a year. I've seen enough of it.
I don't know if you're too young, but I have the question, what was your first interaction with the war? Like, did it ever, directly?
No, one thing. I was this is silly too. I guess I saw parades, and there were always sad parades, because there'd be band music playing, but people were crying because it was parades of soldiers marching off to war. So it was really sad parades. And I was in DeKalb. Again, it was, long after I was married. We'd moved to Troxel. I was in DeKalb, and it was the DeKalb Fest. And they have parades. It's, when school starts and that. And this band came, and I started crying.
Because it reminded you of the music?
Yeah. Band music made me cry for years.
Like marching band music?
Yeah.
That never happened when you saw me, right?
Oh, no, okay. I got over it. But it took a long time to get over that. So that's gotta be from watching parades that were sad. Yeah.
Connecting the...
Yeah.
Like, you yourself didn't,
Yeah, I wasn't aware that, it was all these men marching and, band music, but it was sad. Because I felt the sadness from everybody around me and didn't realize it until that school, that school band, because I loved the parade in Cortland.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice and short, and it's got all the parades and politicians and everything you want to see in a band, and it's over in 15 minutes. I loved that parade, so I don't cry at parades anymore. But that was another odd thing,
Did you realize? Did you connect it? Did you have a flashback?
No,
or was it
no. I just heard the band, and I started crying.
Did you cry at the time in Germany?
No.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Can I mention you to my psych teacher?
Examine that.
Yeah, can we-
Yeah.
I don't think we've gotten to memories yet. We're in sleep right now.
Yeah.
so-
No, memories is a weird thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're at the basics. We're kind of doing biology first, like the neurology.
Yeah.
And then we're in sleep now. I think.
You know, because I didn't suppress any memories. I was too little, and I was protected. You know, but still, there's some things that seeped in that, you know, that I didn't understand at the time, and, you know, that came out later. I mean, that's the only thing I can explain that.
Yeah.
Because it's weird. I mean, crying at parades is weird.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
I'll ask my teacher and get back to you on that.
Yeah.
I mean, you never knew your parents before the war, but did Oma and Opa, did they seem like traumatized or?
They never talked about it. It was just an agreement that it was a subject they never talked about. You know.
Did that have any effect on the way that you guys lived?
I don't know. I really don't know because I didn't, like you said, I didn't know them before the war. I didn't know them, yeah.
But did it ever seem like there was like an elephant in the room and?
No.
It's
And they
never-
were happy with each other. There were just some things that were never touched. And getting together with friends, the war was never, ever mentioned by anybody. Never, ever. The first time, like I said, the first time Opa talked about the war was with Mike. Because Mike asked him specific questions, and so much time had passed that, you know, when Mike was in high school, that was in the 70s, 80s, early 80s, you know, enough time had passed. It was, you know, it was too far back. It didn't matter anymore.
Did your father ever like show signs of any like PTSD, some like?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know?
I wouldn't know.
Was
He
it
was-
generally like a happy?
He was not happy. He was not a happy man, no.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, he was happy with my mother, and for the most part, yeah. But he was not, I would not consider him a happy man,
Mm.
yeah. He was very quiet. He was not outgoing.
My next question is about, you know, Opa telling you the stories, but obviously he didn't.
No.
So, I mean, from
He
Uncle
talked
Mike-
about his time in China, you know,
Yeah?
things like that, yeah. Because Mao Zedong tried to hire him because all of the generals that were training his troops were Germans. All Mao Zedong's troops were all, for the most part, was trained by German generals. So they needed intermediaries, you know.
And he spoke Chinese?
No, but he spoke German and English.
Okay.
You know, so that it would have been from German to English to Chinese, you know. So, but he was a conscientious objector. Except he was afraid to declare himself. When he was drafted, he was afraid to declare himself that, because in the German army, the conscientious objectors were medics and field cooks. Medics and field cooks did not carry guns. They were the conscientious objectors. and they're the ones that are killed first.
Right.
And the field cooks in the American Army, you know, the soldiers carry rations, and if they want a hot meal, that's to be had behind the lines. In the German Army, the field cooks bring the hot meals to the front lines. So they're right in the line of fire.
Wow.
So, yeah. So he, I mean, he was proud to say that he is sure that he never, ever killed anybody during the whole war.
That's cool.
Yeah. In fact, one of his sergeants, when they were first training, one of the things he taught them was how to surrender correctly. Because, you know, they knew the war was lost right from the beginning. Yeah.
Wait, by the time he was
By the
drafted?
time, yeah.
Do you know when he was drafted?
In 1938, on his way back from China.
Huh.
Yeah, his draft notice kept, you know, because he took us the proverbial slow boat to China. He took it back. It was a freighter, and they stopped at all the ports along the way, and he would get his mail. You know, a freighter would stop for maybe a week or 2 weeks, and they would be able to go inland and visit, you know, the countryside in Africa, and he would get his draft notice, and then he would tell the post office employee, "You never saw me, I never got this." So they would send it on to the next stop and the next stop, and then when they got to Marseille, they took his passport away. So he was drafted.
I'm stupid, and I wrote all my questions as if you knew your family before the war.
Yeah, but I don't.
Yeah, I don't
there's
know
no
why I
way.
thought-
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, because there's no telling what the war did to them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I said, like, did you notice any changes in your family dynamics or, like, new roles taken?
No, there's nothing I could tell.
I mean,
the only, you know, my father wasn't exactly depressed, but he was not a happy man. You know.
what about your mom?
She was more adaptable. I mean, you know, she liked it, you know, she liked it in the new country here, she liked it here. Plus, my father wanted to go home right away, and he said, "No, we're not going back to Germany with our tails between our legs. We are going to make a life here. We came here, we're going to stay here."
Mm-hmm.
So she made him stay. Yeah. She was
Oh,
strong.
she made him stay.
Yeah, she was strong when she had to be. I mean, she seemed to be completely submissive all the time, but when she had to be, she was strong. Yeah, because she had to be. When he was in the war, yeah, she had to take care of me. She had to keep us alive. But, I mean, during the war, it was amazing how everyday life went on. You know, in between being bombed, you know, life went on like, you know.
It didn't seem
Yeah.
any different.
No, I mean, just life goes on.
I
mean, it was worse after the war when there wasn't any food. During the war, there was food, you know. But after the war, there was no food to be had, you know, and you had to scramble for food. Oma traded most of her linen and good silver and everything to farmers for food. Yeah.
So, like, immediately after the war, what was it like? I hear that, or I was trying to research something on anything on East Germany like immediately after the war, but all it talked about was Berlin and like the Berlin Wall. That's all that there was on
Well,
East Germany.
the Berlin Wall didn't go up until the 61 or 62. See, because Berlin is in the middle of the Russian sector. And Berlin was divided into four parts too: the English, the French, the American, and the Russian sector. So people were able, like my father, he would go, to Berlin, and he would be able to mail packages, from the American or the British or the French sector, because, that was still the West, even though it was right in the middle of the Russian sector. So finally, the Russians built a wall around the American, French, and English sector and completely isolated them. And they tried to starve them out. And that's when the Berlin airlift happened. I mean, even before the before the wall, they segregated that section. And that's when the Berlin airlift started to feed those people. And then too many people escaped through the western sector of Berlin, and that's when they put the wall around to keep people from escaping. Yeah. Because my aunt, she escaped through West Berlin just before the wall came up.
What was it like in East Germany? Where were you?
Well, we were in a little farm village, so we were lucky because there were farmers there, and they were willing to trade, goods for food. And a lot of times too, because Opa was the teacher and he was teaching their children, they would give us food, So, or they'd invite us to their like birthday parties or anniversary parties, and we'd get good food there. And on the way, for going home, they'd give us a little package of food, So, it wasn't that bad, but like one day, Oma made a soup out of nettles, because somebody told her, nettles, were a good source of protein. So I told her, oh, I really like this soup, and she started crying, So, So it was hard for her to keep food on the table.
Is that most of what you remember of East Germany? Just that?
Yeah, that there wasn't enough food. Yeah.
But everything else seemed normal?
No, not really, because there were there were Russian troops nearby, and my grandmother would go out and she would collect wood for the stove. And by that time she was pretty much senile, because my grandfather was taken away, after the war he was taken away by the Russians, because he worked for the government. He was a tax assessor. So he was a clerk in the government office, but he worked for the government, so they took him away. Yeah. And he died. We later found out he died before he even reached Russia. Yeah. So he died of pneumonia. But it really affected my grandmother. And she slowly turned senile, so she would spy on these Russians. And she'd always find food, you know, bowls of hot food in the middle of the wood. So they knew this crazy old lady was spying on them, so they'd leave food for her, you know. And she said, these dumb Russians, there was a bowl of soup in the middle of, yeah. Yeah. And she'd bring all these sticks home, and the stove, you know, you couldn't put wood in there. It was briquettes. You fired it up with briquettes. So we had these enormous piles of sticks in the backyard, but she kept insisting on gathering sticks in the woods and spying on the Russians. Yeah.
What are the Russians doing?
They were occupational troops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure everything was orderly.
Yeah, I mean, there was a base nearby, you know, so they were just, you know, I don't know, doing exercises or whatever, you know. It was their base, yeah.
What city was this?
That was where Altenbach, the little village of Altenbach, and there was in fact, when we went back to Germany, we went to visit the schoolhouse where we lived, which had grown really tiny. And then we went to visit the base that was still there, and the commander of the base, he was going to let us in because he and Mike were talking about the planes they had, and Mike wanted to see the planes. And then a East German policeman, I mean, this was after the war, the wall had come down, and the two Germanys weren't united yet, you know, but we could, you know, because after the wall came down, it took another year for everything to be regulated and the two Germanys to be united into one again. But anyway, you know, the Russian commander was going to let us on the base, and then a German Stasi, which was the bad, you know, he told them, no, you can't go on the base. And he overrode the Russians' word.
Well, the Russian had no influence over that part of Germany anymore, right?
Well, they were still on their bases. They were being moved out, you know. But in fact, somebody, one of the places we stayed at when on our visit to East Germany, he told us he'd been friends with the East Germans and the Russians. You know, they had their families there, and they became close friends with a lot of the Russian families. And before, about half a year before the wall came down, all these Russians were being moved out, all these friendly Russians, and new Russian soldiers came in without families. You know, so they knew the wall was going to come down. It was all in negotiations. Helmut Kohl, the German, what do you call it? Not president.
Chancellor?
Chancellor, that's it.
Okay.
Helmut Kohl, the chancellor, he was negotiating, you know, and there were certain lands, like the Sudetenland, you know, which was part of Czechoslovakia, and Germany took it before World War II. They just took it by just moving German people in there. Anyway, yeah. That had to go back, and then other lands, you know. So they were negotiating what was going to go where, you know, and it took quite a while, yeah. And that took, yeah. And then when the wall came down, all of a sudden there were no more border guards, and the gates were open. There was no big announcement.
It was just...
It was, the border guards were gone. So the first people to walk across, through the gates were really brave because they thought, are we going to get shot or what's going to
Is this a
happen?
trap?
Yeah, is this a trap? Why are they doing this? And then once people started moving back and forth, then they realized the wall isn't a wall anymore. It's not a barrier anymore, so they started tearing down the wall, because it was no big announcement like, you're free. It was just a removal of border guards. Yeah, yeah.
Um, what were the events that led up to leaving East Germany?
Well, we'd been planning it all along, but then Oma got pregnant, so we had to wait till Peter was old enough. And then actually, what finally made us move was the Communist Party urging Opa to join.
Mm-hmm.
So they figured we've got to move right now.
How old were you?
It was let's see, it was April. In April before my 6th birthday. I was going to turn 6 in June.
Mm-hmm.
So.
You were 5 years old-ish?
Almost 6, yeah.
Almost 6 years old.
Yeah, because as soon as we went to West Germany, as soon as we were settled, I was enrolled in school. It was a little, in Germany, the school year starts at Easter, So I missed the first couple of weeks of school.
School goes during the summer?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's summer vacation, but not as long as here.
Right.
Yeah. But the school year starts at Easter.
So, I remember you mentioned a party when.
Oh yeah, when Opa announced, okay, I'll join the Communist Party, and they gave him a party, to celebrate, and he got really, really drunk, and Oma was scared to death that he would say something. So he must have had one heck of a hangover when we did leave in the next morning.
I was thinking that.
Yeah. Because he doesn't drink. I don't remember him ever being drunk. Yeah.
Maybe that was why.
Yeah.
Who did you leave in East Germany when you guys left? Was it just?
Well, we had to leave my grandmother because she wouldn't have been able to do it was pretty strenuous because there were no trains between East and West Germany. We could take a train close, but then the rest of the way we had to walk. And like I said, we walked. We slept during the day. People helped us for money, a lot of money. They would hide us during the day, and then we'd walk during the night. And there was no way, she would have been able to do it. So we, Opa and Oma made arrangements that she would go to an old age home. Yeah. So, it was a cruel thing to do when you think of it, not telling her, but he had to save his family,
He was. What would have happened had he joined the Communist Party?
Well, he would have been marked for life, as a communist. And, plus he didn't believe in communism. He didn't want to. It's just not something you do.
What,
He just didn't want to.
I mean, it makes sense, but what was I gonna ask? Why couldn't he just flat out refuse?
You don't refuse them. If they invite you, you don't refuse. Yeah. And he was influential. I mean, to have a party when he finally agreed to join, they were happy to have him,
Was it like he was an influential
Yeah, a lot of
person
people
very-
looked up to him.
In the
He was
community?
in the community, yes.
So were they hoping for like a chain effect that this
Yeah.
certain
Oh,
person?
yeah. If he joined, the whole village would have joined. Yeah.
Do you remember like the 3 days
Of walking, yeah, just constantly. Yeah, I can still see some of the streets. There was a full moon, yeah, one night. And I just remember walking along the street. And then when we came to the border, they had warned us, when you come to the border, you're not safe. Just keep walking as fast as you can. Because there's a no man's land on either side, and they'll shoot you. And the guides they didn't go with us, but they would go part of the way and told us where to go.
Were
And
they kind of like coyotes, like helping people?
yeah, they would help people for money. They knew where the border guards usually were, so they knew safe ways to cross the border. Yeah, so I mean, they made a living doing that. And we were lucky. We were, we made it across.
Do you like? Are there any like senses that stick out to you, like when you think about it? Like if you close your eyes and like imagine it, do you smell anything or hear anything specific?
No, I can still see what it looked like, the woods, and I could hear there were, border guards with dogs way, way off on one side. You could hear the dogs barking.
No Man's Land?
Huh?
In No Man's Land?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had to, and then, coming to Hanover and walking through the streets, looking at the shops, looking for the police department.
This is like,
Yeah.
do you remember that like feeling of relief?
Yeah, because we were safe. I mean, I knew we were in danger. I mean, I was old enough to know I was in danger, and then coming to Hanover and we were safe, because Oma and Opa they weren't tense anymore. They were relaxed, and they told me, we're safe, yeah.
Yeah, that's all that I saw on East and West Germany. As soon as you got to the West, like the West didn't care. Like they were just like, okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean we were obviously refugees, but people didn't care. They saw us, and they went on with their business. We weren't the only ones, there were probably hundreds every day. Yeah. That's why they had the refugee camps, set up for people like us. Because we had to stay in one until we were settled, until we had people to help us, or relatives, or.
Were there any times that you came too close, or?
No. Oh yeah, well yeah, when we first got off the train, there was just hundreds of people, going in one direction, trying to get to the border, and Opa wanted to go with them, and Oma said, no, it's not safe, let's stay back. And Opa said, no, we're going with these people. There's safety in numbers. And she said, no. And we had a baby buggy that, you know, she was carrying, or they took turns carrying Peter to keep him quiet, and then the one suitcase was on the baby buggy. So she kicked out the springs. They were like leather springs. I can still remember that, and she kicked them out and broke them. And so we couldn't follow the other people. And then out of nowhere, all these border guards were coming from behind bushes and from behind houses and down alleys, and they were going after these people, and they looked at us and figured, well, you know, we'll get them later, you know, because they knew we couldn't go any place, you know. So while they were going after those people, there was a house right near us, and somebody in the house said, you know, come with us, you know. And those were the first guides. We slept in their house that night, and then that day, and then at night, they told us where to go and meet the second guide. So.
Oh, so they were like actually like. They actually knew what was going on and they knew what to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, there were people, local people, who made a living guiding refugees across the border.
I thought it was just kind of like a luck thing where she was like, hey.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky that we were stopped right in front of that house.
Yeah.
That, you know, where there were people in there willing to help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because most people, the average person, doesn't want anything to do with anything illegal, police, or, you know, helping people. You know, like the book I'm reading right now about the Polish ghetto, you know. There were very brave people who were helping the Jews, but for the most part, no one wanted to do anything, and, you know, have anything to do with it, you know.
My next question is like, how did the family manage to contain emotions? But you said that like, it just didn't.
I don't know.
It just never came up.
Yeah, I don't think they ever talked about it in private. They certainly didn't talk about the war to Peter and I. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like.
I mean, it must have affected them, but.
Yeah.
The only way I ever knew them was after the war, you know, they, yeah.
So even like if you learned about it in school, did you learn about it in school?
No.
But not in Germany, but like if when you came to America, did they?
Not really. They don't teach European history here. They touch on the war, but the German side, you know, there wasn't much history taught, at least when I was in high school. And in Germany, I mean, the history that they talked was way back. Attila the Hun, how he affected the European population. When he moved in, everybody else moved in front of him, away from him, you know. So that was the most recent history I ever got. And then when we were done with that, then I went on to high school and middle school in Germany, and we started with Attila the Hun again. They were afraid to touch anything that was, you know, closer to the World War I or World War II. Just ancient history.
Where did you first arrived in Hanover?
Hanover, yeah.
Okay.
That's right in the middle of Germany.
Okay. And you ended up staying in Bremen?
Well, first we went to Hamburg, because
Okay.
Opa had that friend from the prisoner of war camp who was willing to put us up, because we needed an address, you know.
Right.
somebody who was willing to take us in to get out of that, out of the camp. So this guy took us in, and then we found the house, was really a big garden, really, with all the fruit trees and that. It was nice.
Was it nice coming from East Germany to seeing?
Yeah, oh yeah. So we bought that, and it was right down the road from this friend,
As you grew older and you kind of made sense of the war, did your perception of your parents change?
No, because the war was never talked about. The war was over and done with, and we were trying to rebuild. Yeah.
But, like, as you made sense of it, like, you understood more of, like, what your parents went through?
We never talked about it. It was never taught in school. It was just something in the past that we didn't want to rehash. Mm-hmm. We looked forward. I mean, I still remember, I was in grade school, and I must have been maybe 8 years old, so it was maybe 1950. Germany was allowed to build its first ship. I mean, for Germany to have commerce, to trade with other countries, they needed ships. Mm-hmm. So Germany was finally allowed to build the first ship in 1950 or thereabouts. And that was a big deal. And I realized this in grade school. We talked about that. How wonderful it was that Germany was allowed to build a ship. Another big deal was every time somebody in grade school got a new pair of shoes. Yeah, or if a girl got a new dress. I mean, that was a big, big deal.
When a girl got a new dress?
Yeah, almost as big as Germany building a ship, yeah.
So, I mean, did you feel any tension as a child that you couldn't?
No.
You didn't realize, or
No.
you just never noticed it?
Never noticed until that parade in Ethiopia. Yeah, things like that. Yeah.
So, like, when you became a parent, were you able to kind of realize what Oma was?
No.
Did you ever, like, consider it?
Oh yeah. For her, for her 80th birthday, I decided to write her a letter. Mm-hmm. And I wrote her that, I was grateful for, what she did. As I was writing the letter, I realized what she'd been doing, protecting me from the war. Mm-hmm. As scared as she must have been, she just didn't show it, protecting me that way. Because I didn't know what, I knew there was a war. I knew that, people were fighting. Opa was away fighting in the war. The planes were, flying over. But I never really thought that I could be killed. As a 3-year-old, you don't think of that. As a 2 and 3-year-old, you don't think of death. So I was too little. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think or how would you say the events of your past how have they shaped you as a person?
I don't know. I've been very, very, very poor. I've been hungry. So to this day, I don't waste food. Yeah. If I have to throw something away, it makes me feel bad. Yeah. And Oma, for her whole life, when she would get a new loaf of bread and before she'd cut it, she'd make the sign of the cross on the bottom of the bread, and she'd say a prayer. And she's not even Catholic, you know. She's Lutheran, or was, you know. But I mean, food was always precious, you know. It's surprising that I don't overeat. Now that I have food, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't hoard, yeah.
I think that's. I hear that all the time, that hunger is such an enormous motivator, and it's so powerful, and
Yeah,
and you
because
just
I
can never
remember
forget
being
it.
hungry, yeah. Yeah, because I was worried about food. There was never enough food. You know, and Oma would stand in lines. There was one grocery store in the village. Well, there was a bakery, but there was a general grocery store in the village. And when there would be rumor that there'd be, I mean, the grocery store was closed most of the time, except if they got some food in. And if there was a rumor of food coming, any kind of food, you know, people would line up and stand, you know, waiting in line for the store to open. So Oma would stand in line, and then I would have to take her place when she would have to go home and nurse Peter. So I would stand in line for her, and then she'd come back and stand in line, and most of the time the store never opened. Yeah. So I mean, food was always uppermost in my mind, as little as I was. You know, and the farmers would let us glean the fields after they had harvested it. You know what gleaning the fields means? You can walk along the fields, along the wheat rows, and pick up any kernels of wheat that are left. You know, because when they, you know, I mean, back then it was all done by hand with a scythe, you know, and they put the wheat stalks together, but there'd be stuff left on the ground that wasn't worthwhile for the farmer to pick up, so we were allowed to glean the fields, and we'd get a little bag of grains, and we would trade that at the bakery for a loaf of bread, or two, depending on how much wheat we would glean, and I would help Oma with that. That's why, you know, food was uppermost, you know.
So it's another one of those things. It's just this subconscious thing that you're.
Yeah, I hate to waste food. Yeah. I eat a lot of leftovers, like soup. I mean, I cannot make a decent pot of soup, you know, because I started out, you know, I'll make a little pot of soup. It always grows. I always have a big pot of soup, so I have soup in the freezer for the next 4 days. Yeah. And I ate soup, and you ate soup, and there's still soup left for 4 more days. Yeah. Bless you.
Thank you. Oof. Is there anything else that?
Can't think of anything else. Yeah.
Okay. Did it? How do you think it? Do you think it affected your relationships
With Oma and Opa?
with
Or
your
with
parents,
anybody?
or grandpa, or your children or grandchildren?
I don't think so. You know, it didn't really affect me, you know, except for, you know, buried memories and that. But that, you know, I don't think it affected me. It might have affected my parents, but I never knew them without, you know,
Right.
their memories of the war. So, you know. they never looked back. Like I said, they didn't talk about it. I would ask Omar questions and she would just avoid answering. Yeah.
Like, questions about the war?
Yeah.
Like, years later?
Yeah.
Huh.
And she'd tell me, yeah, she said, I really don't remember. So that was always her answer. I don't remember. And then I tell her specific things that I remembered. And she said, how can you remember that? Yeah. Yeah. But she just, I don't know if she refused to remember or if she actually didn't remember. So.
Do you think it affected your relationship with Grandpa?
I'm sure it did. Yeah.
Just in minor ways that...
Yeah, it might have made them closer, really. The two against the world. Because, they were apart for so long. When they were first married. They were married, Oma was planning a big, huge wedding. She had the material for her wedding dress, and she had it at the dressmaker, and then Opar called her and said, or he wrote her and said, I'm going to have a furlough, and that's going to be the last one for ever, for I don't know how long, but he said, I want to get married now. Let's get married now. So she didn't get to wear her wedding dress, and they had a quickie wedding, and then he went back to the war. Yeah.
Do you think that kind of motivated you to have a bigger wedding?
I didn't have a big wedding. I eloped too.
You eloped?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard your...
Oh, yeah. Well, that's another story. Yeah.
But then
Oma, yeah, and then Oma and Opa did have a church wedding when I was baptized.
Oh.
He was able to come home on a furlough when I was baptized, or he came home on a furlough, and that's when I was baptized, because I think by that time I was almost a year old. So I was baptized and they got married.
Well, that's nice.
So, yeah. But again, she didn't wear her wedding dress because she had sold the material. Yeah, probably for food.
Were you ever intimidated by your father because he's seen the war, or you just didn't kind of?
Well, I mean, German, back then, German children were raised differently. We could be seen but not heard. I mean, we had to stay in the background. I mean, we were never ever punished. Peter and I were never ever struck or anything, but we weren't hugged either. It was a cold upbringing, really. Yeah. Yeah, because Oma liked it when, she came to live with us. We hugged when we said hello, and we hugged when we said goodbye. And she loved that, because she, her mother died when she was, I think, yeah, her mother died when she was 1. So she never really knew her mother. She was raised by her grandparents. And her grandmother wasn't even her grandmother, it was her step-grandmother. So she was raised by a stranger, And they were close, but it wasn't her mother, so. But I mean, Peter and I were raised the typical German way, we were instructed.
And that was like German way. That wasn't East German way. That was
No,
German
it was
way?
just the German way, yeah.
Did that influence you to be kinder to your children?
Yeah, I was certainly closer to them than, my parents were to me. Yeah.
Was that because of your surroundings, like being in America, that's the American way, or was it just kind of like I can do this?
I mean, that's how everybody else raised their children here, yeah.
So
Yeah.
was it like learning
And I-
from your surroundings, or you just
No, I
wanted to
just
do it?
loved my children. I wanted them around me. I wanted them near me. I loved summer vacation. Yeah. I hated it when they went back to school. Yeah, I just wanted them around me.
Did so like would you say that like this you said cold upbringing like made you more drawn to wanting to spend time with your children?
Yeah, because I didn't want them to be treated the way I was. I mean, I knew my parents cared for me, but they just didn't show it. Yeah.
Do you think it had any the way you were raised or just anything about Germany? Do you think it affected your relationship with Grandpa?
I think it did. That I was too withdrawn. Maybe too cold. Well, because he was raised the German way too, by Grandpa, yeah. So, because he told me once, he was so jealous of the relationship that I had with my daughters, and he said he wished he could have had a relationship like that with his son. Yeah. But he didn't know how to be close to the kids. Yeah, he would tell them that he loved them when they were asleep. He'd kiss them good night when they were asleep, and he'd tell them he loved them. And I said, just tell them when they're awake. And he said, no, they'll know. They'll know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I overcame my German upbringing, and he didn't. Yeah.
Did like you? What do you mean you were too cold to him? You were too distant from him?
I don't know. I mean, no, I wasn't cold to him, but there were just certain things that we never discussed. Yeah.
Like what?
How we felt. I don't know, in retrospect, thinking back, we could have been closer. Yeah.
And that was just due to your German upbringing?
I don't know what it was, really. Yeah. Maybe part of it, yeah.
I'm at the end of my question,
Yeah.
the questions that I made up, so I'm trying to think of anything else that I want you to elaborate on.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else either. Yeah. You can always call if you think of something, where I am.
Reviewing when I'm writing it up, I'm sure I'm going to have more questions.
Yeah, you'll have questions and you'll need clarification, yeah. So, what time is it?
We have
6 o'clock.
an hour and a half on the video.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, you'll get something out of that.
Yeah, but I have to totally rewrite the...
Yeah, well, you'll have to figure out what aim to take, because the aim that you were aiming for, the relationship changing, that's just not there.
I mean,
Yeah.
from what I'm getting so far, I think it's gonna have to be kind of like a more, like just a storytelling. But I mean, maybe if I show this to my teacher, he'll have a different
Yeah.
viewpoint on it. What story I can make of it.
Yeah. And you can show it to your psychiatry. Once you study memory, how memory affects you, or sometimes how a smell can affect you. For me,
Yeah.
it was the sound of the band, for one thing, and then the sound of the planes, the warbirds flying over, so it was sounds that affected me. Yeah.
That's interesting because she says that we learned that the biggest thing that is linked to memory is smell.
Yeah, I heard that too. But there are no smells that, triggered anything. For me, it was sounds.
Maybe it's just more noticeable. Like
Yeah,
if you smell something, it was just like a brief moment,
Yeah.
and then it disappeared. But
yeah.
what do you have any like specific memories that you can think of growing up, like specific like happy memories?
Well, yeah, going on vacations, with Oma and Opa and Peter, and yeah. I mean, that's all after the war.
When you
Yeah.
guys were in West Germany,
Yeah, in West Germany.
going to Bavaria.
Yeah. Or, just on our, in Hamburg, or going to school, yeah, with friends, and, because we were all in the same boat. We were all poor, we were all rebuilding our lives, so we had a lot of common, and people were closer back then. People were really close. Because they had all experienced the same things, and they were all rebuilding their lives, so, it was,
I mean, I think that's what
Yeah.
brings people together, this
yeah,
commonalities and almost a common enemy.
yeah. And the funny thing is, to have a fat wife showed you were prosperous.
A fat wife was good.
A fat wife was good because it showed that you had enough food to eat. You were prosperous, but that was many years after the, not right after the war. No one was fat then, but 3-4 years after the war was a good thing to have a fat wife. Because I remember we were at a Christmas party. We were all sitting, and this man came in, and he had a fat wife. And somebody mentioned, he must be doing well. She really looks good. I mean, that's funny.
I mean, she couldn't have been like fat to our standards. She
was,
Germany. She's probably just pudgy at most, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, not fat, what we consider fat now. Because even now in Europe, it's very unusual to see anybody fat.
Yeah.
People just eat better. Yeah. They eat well.
It's so like refreshing in Germany because everything is just so like
Healthy.
yeah, like
Yeah.
pure, and
Yeah.
it's nice. I like it.
I mean, they have McDonald's there.
It's different.
But people just don't go there every day of their lives. Yeah.
I told you that I'm considering studying abroad, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an idea.
Right in the beginning?
Huh?
Or right after high school, or wait
yeah.
a couple?
I mean, if I can, because they have much stricter requirements.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I need to meet those, and then I can actually
Yeah.
consider it. And they're
And if
deadlines
there are
are so
two,
different.
yeah, if there are two openings at a university, they will take the German first before they'll take a foreigner, yeah. Because, you know, places at a university are hard to come by.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about Germany because, you know, I'd have to learn the language, but I'm considering England, maybe Ireland. Let me think.
Well, you have an uncle who's Irish, so maybe through him you can become an Irish citizen.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
There's something there.
Yeah, because Maddie was considering that, and she was going to become an Irish citizen, and for her, you know, it would have been really easy. And Patricia, her cousin, she's actually an Irish citizen. Yeah.
Wait, is Uncle Pat like an Irish citizen?
No.
Oh.
But his father was born in Ireland. So by Irish rules, you can apply for Irish citizenship and chances are you'll get it.
Yeah, I feel like they're pretty lenient about that kind of stuff
Yeah.
there.
Oh, yeah.
Anything you want to add?
Can't think of anything else.
Okay. Well, if you do have something, you know, I can just pop this right back open and
Yeah.
thank you for dinner, by the way. I'll